Okay, so on that note, we'll get going. So welcome everyone. I am 𝘵𝘚𝗵𝘠. I'm one of the co-founders of 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵𝘩, and this is going to be a session on effective job hunting. Just some kind of quick housekeeping before we get going. Please do drop in the chat where you're from, what kind of roles you're looking for. I'll try and tailor the session to those. This is also, it's designed to be an interactive session. So if you've got questions, please do, again, drop them in the chat. I'll try and answer as many as possible. We are recording the session and we'll share the recording on our YouTube channel as soon as possible, which realistically will be sometime tomorrow. But do reach out to me. You can find me very easily on LinkedIn or via 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵 if you have other questions that we didn't get round to. Just to give you sort of a bit more context on what is 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵, who are we? So 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵 is a digital platform that gives you the support you deserve as a tech leader. It's founded by me, my co-founder Susanna. We've both held executive roles, like multiple executive roles in startups and scale-ups. And what makes 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵 different from other people you'll likely see is that our advice is super practical. Like we didn't this isn't kind of abstract frameworks and things that sound good on paper. This is stuff we've actually done ourselves, used ourselves, worked with other people in our teams on. We're really focused on career acceleration, so helping you get promoted and helping you find new jobs. We design all of our guides, whether it's job hunting or product management skills, to be immediately applicable. So it's stuff that you can get going with same day and deliver results with, in hours, not kind of over weeks. And we aim to be really comprehensive as well. So we structure a lot of our content into a wiki. It's all linked. We don't have multiple competing articles on the same thing. So if you're looking for answers, it's just much easier to find what you're looking for and get a sensible answer. So on 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵, the site, there's the platform that we offer has kind of three main things to it. We've got our courses, and this session is effectively almost like the highlights of one of our courses. But we have 8 or 9 courses now. We bring out new courses every month or two. We've got a wiki and a template library that has about 100 different how-to articles in now. So anything you're looking for guidance on, then you'll probably find something in the wiki. And that, as I say, is all kind of cross-linked, so it's easy to navigate around. We also have AI-powered search on that, so you can just ask our AI chatbot like what your problem is, and it will give you a summary as well as like point you at the relevant articles. And then we also have a community Slack, so particularly valuable if you're job hunting. If you want that kind of emotional and practical support as you're going through it, then there's loads of people in our community Slack who are very generous with their time, and are also peers and kind of like willing to help each other out and help things move forward. So that's kind of what we offer if you're interested in going deeper with 𝘆𝑆le𝘚𝘵. As I mentioned, like this webinar, we're going to be talking basically about the highlights from our job hunting course. So this is a 5-week course that we've got, which is designed for people to help them find their next role. That could be that they're currently in a role but looking to move somewhere else. It could be that they don't have a job at the moment and they're full-time job hunting. This course, as I say, it's kind of like distilled down from our personal experience, the best practices from around the web, and we know it works because we have lots of people tell us that they've this has been a critical part of them getting a new job. So yeah, I kind of share these insights with some kind of degree of confidence that if you follow this advice, like job hunting at the moment, it's not like it's not a super rosy picture. I think we all know that the job hunting market is difficult right now. But the kinds of tips and tactics that we're sharing here, these really do make a difference. These really do kind of shift the odds in your favor and help you find not only a job, but also a job that's a really good fit for you personally and what you want to do with your career. So enough of that kind of blurb out the way. The rest of this session, as I say, is going to be just like very, very practical tips on how to structure your job search and how to go through and get a product role. It's broadly broken down into these 5 areas, which map to the 5 weeks in the course. If at any point you've got questions, dump it in the chat, stick your hand up, and I'll answer them as we go through, basically. And then if we wrap up early, I can stay on the call a bit and answer questions as well. Okay, well, with that, I will just crack straight on. So whenever people ask me about, how do they think about getting a job, the first thing I talk to them about is whether or not they know what they want, because a lot of people don't, or they've got a very vague sense of what they want. They're like, well, I need a job. I'm like, okay, great. Yeah, you've got a financial imperative. You've got to pay the bills. That'll make sense. But that's going to be much easier if you can be a bit more specific about what you're looking for. And the way I think about it is, whatever is next for you, it's kind of like middle bucket, that's going to be related to the experience and where you've come from, but also where you want to go to. So, sorry, if people, if I hear any noise off people, I'm just going to mute them straight away. If you're trying to ask a question, probably best to stick it in the chat, just so I know it's not accidental noise. So, yeah, where you've come from, this is the jobs you've had in the past, the education you've done, side interests, projects, other passions outside of work that you've got. This kind of like paints a picture of who you are, and it's both to people who might employ you, but it's also a good reflection of who you are to yourself. Your actions speak louder than words in that sense. But where you've come from doesn't completely dictate where you're going to go to, and it's worth having a think about. Ultimately, where are you trying to get to in your career? Like, do you want to set up your own business? Do you want to be CPO at a startup? Do you want to become a product coach and work 3 days a week? It'd be like, there's lots of different sort of end games to a product career, or including like not being in product, and having a sense of where that is, I think is really valuable. So if you can think, you've got a good sense of where you've come from and you've got a good sense of where you're going to, then your next role is effectively what bridges the gap or starts to bridge the gap between those two things. So, for example, like if you've been a business analyst and you've done maybe a lot of analytics, but you've just moved into product management, you love product management, that's great. A lot of your work has been in e-commerce and you want to move into fintech, right? Then you're getting a sense of like, okay, I've come from e-commerce, I've come from analytics. Actually, I want to be a CPO, I want to be in fintech. Great. What are the next roles? Can I move further up the ladder with my next role? Can I just get more product experience? Can I shift sectors? And is now the right time to do that? So those are the sorts of questions you can be asking yourself. And my guidance here is always to be as specific as possible, right? So if you just say, a lot of people kind of will message me out the blue and be like, oh, I'm just looking for a job as a PM. I'm like, okay, that's not super helpful. I don't really know where to start with that, because I might be a special case because I've got a whole load of connections on LinkedIn now. But even before I started running Hustle Badger, if someone came to me and said I wanted a job as a PM, I'd be like, okay, well, I could introduce you to 100 people who might be hiring, but I can't figure out who to introduce you to, even if I want to, because you haven't given me any details. And do I even want to introduce you, because it doesn't seem like you really know what you want? And is that going to make me look good as the person introducing you? Overall, I'd say like it's not a good, it's not going to help you find what you're looking for. When you're really specific what you want, and when I say specific, I mean something like this. So there's a statement like, I want to work for a consumer-facing marketplace with a community angle. I can be anywhere, like post, it's a company that's got product market fit, but hasn't gone public yet. Don't really mind about industry. Health or fitness would be ideal, and definitely not fintech. Okay, so it doesn't need to be like super, super specific, but it needs to have some kind of stage around it. Because at this point, if you're reaching out to someone who's got a reasonable network and you're asking for intros, then they're going to think, oh yeah, I should introduce them to these three people. They're just the obvious people to introduce them to. And this person knows what they want and they sound switched on, and a mutual intro is always, well received. So I've got a lot more confidence to make that intro. But also if you're introducing yourself to a hiring manager, then you start to look exactly like the person they're looking for. And hiring managers are going to get hundreds and hundreds of applications, and you don't want to look like a good enough candidate. You want to look like the perfect person they are looking for, because they will only be speaking to the people who look perfect to them, right? If you've got 200-300 applicants, which could be a low estimate these days, then you're not going to bother speaking to, if you've got 200 applicants, you're not going to bother speaking to 190 of them. You're going to stick to speaking to the 10 that seem like the best fits for the role that you've got. Okay, just diving into the questions here. One practical question. When a relevant opportunity opens up and is on LinkedIn for a company and have no previous colleagues or references, how would you suggest the best approach without just blankly sending CV and cover letter? Yeah, we're going to dive into that in kind of further on. So we'll talk about what I call like an active search and how you could use different channels for approaching people in just a moment. That'll kind of be like the third section we talk about. Okay, so that's kind of like the first thing is figure out what you want. And this is something like, if you've got, like you're still stuck at this kind of like, oh, well, I just want a PM. I'm like, okay, again, go back a step, go back here. Where have you come from? What did you like? What did you not like? What gave you energy? What do you see your friends doing or your colleagues that seems interesting? Like what comes up in the news that gets you interested? Like have a think about all of these things. And we've got a bunch of exercises you can do in the course to help you figure this out. Talk it over with friends, with family, like try and narrow it down. And then once you've got something, go and tell it to a few people and, see if it sounds right. I'd also say, like, if you really don't care, if you're like, well, I'm kind of, student of the world, I love everything, the world's a wonderful place, great. It's still worth, I think, coming up with like a slightly narrower focus, just because it's going to make it easier for you to get people's attention and to connect with them. You can change this sense. You can change this kind of description you've got here about where you're going anytime you want. You're not making a commitment to anyone by coming up with this. What you're doing is just making it easier for people to know what you're looking for and how to connect to you, and also what you're looking for yourself. I'll pause just kind of shortly here. Anyone got any questions over this before I move on? Okay, I'm gonna move on. Of course, if you do have questions, then we can come back. So second thing here, polish your CV. And when I say CV, I don't mean just like your actual kind of CV. I mean your LinkedIn, your kind of digital presence as well. But effectively, you want to go through and make sure that what hiring managers see of you positions you in the best light. And the key thing to remember is this chart. And again, like 200 applications for a PM role these days is going to be on the low end of things. We've had people in our community say that they've heard back from hiring managers who admitted that they had like thousands of applications for a single role. So the biggest drop off in that funnel, your product managers, think about this as a funnel you're optimizing. The biggest drop off is between the application, the CV, and actually some kind of phone screen from whether that's the hiring manager or an HR person. So this is kind of like, this is like a kind of archetypal hiring round, hiring process. Actual processes will probably like vary from this a little bit. So this is the big drop off you've got to get past. And your CV needs to be really tight because that's its one job, is to get you past that cliff. But also, if you can just enter the process like already beyond this stage, that's great too, because then you're past the hardest stage. So how do you do that? A few kind of principles here for your, again, for your CV, for your LinkedIn presence. Put yourself in the position of the hiring manager, right? I'm looking to hire someone. I need one product manager. I stick my job description on LinkedIn. I immediately get 300 applications. Quite possible, right? Do I go through all of those myself? And if so, how long am I going to spend on each of those CVs? Like realistically, a hiring manager is going to spend 20 to 30 seconds on a CV. And they want to know within that time whether you are a standout candidate for this role, like an amazing fit or not. Because if it's a maybe, they're not going to look at you a second time, right? Like I say, they're really going to be like, they're getting so many applications these days that you really want to like be that kind of like perfect person for the role. So first principle here is like, do not kind of overstuff your CV. Like you can get down to a one-page CV. You don't have to, but I would really suggest that you strongly suggest you aim for that as your goal, as your target. It's tempting to put on like a lot of detail about all the amazing, wonderful things that you've done. But actually what you're doing is you're really just diluting the most impressive stuff a lot. So what you want to do is really like cut it down, keep the stuff that is really impressive, that it's really unique to you, and make it just jump off the page. So if you think you've got a two-page CV, if you cut out kind of like what you want to do is cut out like the least impressive 50% of it, and then you've got a one-page CV that looks twice as good. That's kind of the principle you're looking for. And again, this is something where if you have a draft of your CV, if you drop it in our Slack community, you're going to get feedback, and you can really see people's CVs tightening up when they go through this process a little bit. Second thing is fit. So, if you can, right, and that's, if you have the time to do it, you want to customize your CV for the job that you're applying for. We'll talk a little bit about this later on, but like particularly when you're in the world of LLMs and so on, good chance that your hiring manager will be using an LLM to scan your CV, and other applicants will be using LLMs to kind of perfect their CV and tune it a bit. So what you want to do is like look at the job description, be very clear what they're looking for, and then make sure those things are reflected in your CV. You're probably not going to do this for all of your applications because it is quite a time-intensive process, but you want to do it for the kind of your top tier of applications that you really care about. And again, we'll talk about tiering a little bit in the next section. So like think about kind of like, is it really clear to the hiring manager that you're a good fit for this role? Next principle, impact. So when I'm hiring people, one of the kind of first scans I do when I look at their CV is just how many numbers there are in their CV. Because people who put numbers in their CV, usually they're saying like, oh, I drove, 30% increase in this metric. I drove that cost down by X%. I managed this larger team. I did, this number of releases. The numbers don't mean anything to me because I have like no context. I don't know if a 30% increase in your metric is a good or not, right? But someone who thinks quantitatively, who thinks about impact and can kind of has that kind of mindset is much more likely to be a good product manager, in my opinion, than someone who just says, oh yeah, I did a lot of X, Y, Z, and it's all very qualitative. So really focus on the numbers, the specifics that make it sound like you've done good things, and it jumps off the page. And the other thing I'd say is power words. So you want to keep your CV like very, very tight, like strip out any words that are kind of generic, adjectives, things that, don't really have any meaning or aren't specific to you, take them out. But do use like, punchy words, the kind of power words like led, built, shipped, things like this that make it sound like you're really good at what you do. Because again, that's the impression that you've got. Like, and be a little bit careful about kind of softer word, facilitated this, I gathered this, I supported that, because as a product manager, you want to sound like someone who's really driving things and creating impact. We've got a whole template of a whole long list of different power words you can use for inspiration on this. Just going to have a quick look at the questions here. Okay. So digital presence, is it necessary to build a personal brand on LinkedIn? No. And for most people, I'd say, don't bother posting on LinkedIn. So posting on LinkedIn it's quite a long game. If you really want to build your network, you've got to be posting daily for several months to make any kind of progress. And even then, it's not really a good indicator of whether it's whether you're right for a job or not. So I wouldn't do it for the purposes of finding a job. There are other kind of more targeted ways of networking that I would suggest that you do. Are there any specific prompts that you would suggest to use the advertised job description to evaluate and customize the CV for the job? I don't have specific prompts that I can share, but what I would do, and I love to hear from people who've done this in the world as well, is basically copy the job description and your CV, dump them both into an LLM, and basically say, how good a fit am I for this role, and where could I be stronger, and where could I fill any gaps? So get that kind of critique back, and then have a think about are there ways you could tighten up your CV to make it tighter. In terms of templates and so on, so we've got a template, we've got some examples. You can click on them here. I would say if you look in Google Docs, there's a bunch of templates in Google Docs. It's not worth coming up with your own template to stand out. And in fact, I think that's generally can be a detractor rather than a rotor. It's a bad thing, not a good thing, because for a couple of reasons. Firstly, a nice simple text format, most people's CVs are like that, so they're easy to read, and you get used to looking at that framework, that kind of format as a hiring manager. If you've then got someone who's done some kind of crazy graphic, then it can be really difficult to understand what they've done, or kind of you have to spend extra time just digesting the format, which is generally a bad thing. And the second thing is, if they have any kind of automated system for reviewing your CV, then a more graphical format might not get read as well by an automated CV screener. So I would just keep it simple. Basically, as I say, we've got templates you can have, they're free, get them out of Google Docs, whatever it is. I'd also say, no, that was it. So what to include, what not to include in your CV. And again, you're really focused on, you got to be super tight on what's going to get you a interview, right? So you've got to have your contact details, right? You might have a summary, literally one line on why people should hire you. And particularly if you are doing the fit thing, it should be we're looking for a strong data-focused PM who's got marketplace experience. You should just be I am that person. I've done all these things. You then want your kind of achievements. So you might have a little section. I'd say this is a little bit optional, but makes more sense as you get more senior, where you say, what are the kind of top 3, 4, 5 things that I've done in bullet points across all my roles? Makes a lot of sense if you're at the kind of director, VP, CPO level, you can be like, oh, I ran an org of 50 people. I created £100 million, business, right? If you've got those earlier on in your career, great, do it. If not, leave out the achievements. And then your evidence is all your kind of typical stuff, experience, education, projects, of which experience is probably going to be the biggest bit. So experience, where you've worked previously, what you did at each of those roles. Education, I would keep this tight, and I would think about, what makes you stand out. So if you've got kind of a load of academic awards and things like that, cherry pick the ones that make you look the best and include those, but keep it really, really punchy. Because again, the hiring manager isn't going to recognize, the award that you got. They're just going to see that you've got an award. So just make it clear that you got that thing. And projects, I would basically only include this to fill the gaps in your CV that you don't have from experience or education. So you want to be an AI PM, you've got no AI background, but actually you've built a chatbot for something, in your free time. Great. Include that as a project to show that actually you are a credible candidate for the AI role that you're going for. That's the principle there, right? You're filling gaps to kind of like make sure you have that fit you're looking for. So things not to include: skills. Like lots of people be like, oh, I'm, here are my skills, and they put little star ratings next to them. Like it's just generally not relevant for PMs, and it's really hard to benchmark. If you put 3 stars, 5 stars, I'm like, okay, is that good? I mean, what's your comparison here? Personal kind of stuff, I generally wouldn't, again, if it makes you look amazing, then maybe include it. So if you've, run an ultra marathon or run a music festival, or you've got some like really impressive stuff, great, because that's going to help kind of make you look more credible. But if you're going to say like, oh, I love movies and I love kind of like walking, I'm like, okay, that's great. I mean, I enjoy those things too, but everyone did that. It's not worth including on your CV. And something like cover letters, if you've got the time, do them. Yeah, maybe even make a loom, like make a video, right? But you're not going to do that for all your roles. Okay, so that's your kind of CV, tidying up there. I'm going to move on. Oh wait, I'm just going to check the questions quickly, see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. Digital presence. So product portfolios, yeah. Hansa, our product portfolio is a thing now. I'd include that under the kind of projects setting. Like if you've done a bunch of work and you think it's worth kind of having that makes sense. So if you can keep your CV to 1 page, great. If you have a personal blog or a personal website or a digital portfolio, great. I keep it up to date. Only include it if it's up to date. Only include it if it makes you look really great. And I'd say it's a nice to have thing. It's not like a really critical thing to do, in my experience. Okay, active search. So again, just like going back to this chart, most of the people posting PM roles at the moment are getting hundreds of applications. If you don't have to go through this application round, like you don't have to be one of those CVs, but you can go straight to speaking with a hiring manager, you're already like 90% of the way there, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to get the job definitely, but it means that you're a big step closer. So what most people are doing who are really effective at job hunting is that they're not just kind of like sending out applications to companies as and when they kind of see job ads, right? They're really kind of like having a very structured approach to applying for jobs, and they're basically building their own a big spreadsheet and working out, okay, here are all the jobs I can apply for, which are the ones that I really want, and then kind of also kind of budgeting the amount of time that they spend on each application, depending on how good a fit it is for them. So creating your big spreadsheet, you're going to put in things like the name of the company, what the website is, how many employees are there, are they currently hiring, all these sorts of things. And you're going to end up with a spreadsheet like this. So you could do it by people, or you can do it by companies, or you might have like one tab for each, right? Just up to you how you do it, right? But you're going to track things like, yeah, well, when did I last contact them? And when am I next going to contact them? What kind of category is this person? And all this sort of stuff. How do you fill that list up, right? Where do you actually fill that? Right, well, add some companies you already know about, like, that could be big companies like, oh, maybe Google or Meta or whatever, or just, startups you know about. Watch the press, watch social media. Are you reading TechCrunch? Have you like, what's coming up in the newsletters? One moment, please. Just sorry about that. Short interlude. You can search for companies, just plug it into Google, like look for things, you'll find lists on on different websites, and you can also look through VC portfolios. So these are all good ways, right? So you're not aiming to get a kind of map the entire market, you're aiming to have a kind of a list of leads that you can then work in different ways. So as I say, you're going to get something a bit like this. This is obviously like one of the templates that you can get on Hustle Badger as well, right? So you can build your own. As you build this list, you want to start thinking about how do you categorize each of these. You want to kind of prioritize them into tiers, because this is almost like your backlog, right? Here's my backlog of all the people I can speak to, all the jobs I can apply for. Is this a kind of gold, silver, bronze level tier for me, right? Prioritize it in that basis. And that goes back to kind of like this statement about what are you looking for? How good a fit is this for you personally? And then for each tier, also think about, okay, how much time am I going to spend on this? Because even if you are full-time job hunting, there's just a certain number of hours in the day, right? So, maybe your gold tier, you're going to spend like 2 hours on an application. Your silver tier, you're going to spend 20 minutes, and your bronze tier, you're going to spend 5 minutes. So your bronze tier, you're going to see it on LinkedIn. You're going to see the kind of answer button, thing like automatic application, boom, and you're in. Very low chances of success, but maybe it's not a great fit for you, and you're just going to kind of play the numbers game. Whereas your gold ones, then you're going to really like review your CV. You're going to kind of rewrite your CV for it. You're going to see if you can get a warm connection there. You're going to write a proper cover letter. Like the extra time you use into you put towards things that are going to make your application stand out. And so once you've got that list, you've got that spreadsheet, right? A big list of people you're going to go and speak to, 3 different ways then that you might reach out to them. And you're going to be doing like all of these in parallel. So easiest one, your basic applications. So you hit the apply button on LinkedIn or wherever you find it. These kind of what I call like formal applications, very low chances of success just because of the numbers, right? But also very like easy to do, and you probably need to do it at some point anyway, just to be in their system and have your details like in there, especially if they're a bigger company which is running an ATS, an applicant tracking system, right? If you if you see a company that's got a job open, just get your application in, then look for warm intros and do cold outreach like as well on top of it. But make sure you get kind of like get this done as a kind of like a base case and just get it out of the way. Your best way of getting into companies is to like a warm connection. So someone either someone directly at that company, or someone who knows someone at that company. So you can get like a friend or a colleague to introduce you to someone that's relevant there. If you don't, you can do that, just say like, oh, Steve, I see you're connected to, Bob at Google. Can you introduce me? Great, that's one way. The other way you can do it is sort of saying like, oh, Steve, I'm looking for X. You've got your statement, what you're looking for. What company should I look at? That's going to feed your target list. Who can you introduce me to? That's going to feed your target list. So you can also just kind of reach out to people who are kind of like in the broad area of that you're trying to get a job in, and see who they can introduce you to. And that's quite effective, and you can start to build your network there. Like every coffee you have, try and get 2 more coffees off the end of it. And I use the coffee term kind of like quite broadly here. When you're setting up these meetings, you can also go for a kind of cold outreach approach. So I don't know this person, but they look like they are working for a company I want to work for, or they're working for a sector that I'm interested in, and I want to build them as a network, a connection. Okay, I might just do some cold outreach. If you do that, right, your first message, it's got to have 3 things in it, right? It's got to say like why you're credible. That's generally like the qualifications, the previous roles you've had, like, hey, I'm a product manager at Monzo, now I want to work in here. You want to say why you're reaching out to them personally, and make it clear this is not just a generic message you're sending to hundreds of people. And then you want to ask them for something very small. And something small because it's easier for them to respond. As soon as you've got a response, then that's the kind of the beginnings of relationship. So what you don't want to do is say like, hey, I'm looking for a product management role. Can we grab a coffee? Because I'm like, if I get that message, like, I don't know who you are. I'll probably just tell you to put in an application to the process. It's not doing anything for you. If someone reaches out to me and says like, hey, Ed, I'm really interested in the ed tech sector. Really wanted to kind of ask you about, how do the roles differ from marketplaces or whatever? Like, I can probably send them like some articles or connect them to someone very, very quickly. I'm just much more likely to kind of see it through. And once you've done that kind of initial ask, then you can kind of go back a few weeks later and say, oh, great, I did that thing. This is how it went. This is what I learned. This is where I've got to. And you can kind of ask for something a little bit more. And you can ask for a little bit more because you have started to build that connection. So this does take time, but it has enduring value, whether you're job hunting or not. So the network you build doing this is going to be valuable for years. So it's worth doing. And I'd really think about this as a kind of research project. So if you're looking to, particularly if you're looking to kind of break into a new sector, a new kind of type of job, then go and find out everything you can about that sector or about that company. So think of it as a research project. That's going to say like, hey, what do you want to know about that sector? What do you want to know about that company? And that knowledge, as you accumulate it, is you're going to have genuine questions, which is going to make your outreach more credible, but also you're going to build your knowledge and make yourself a more credible candidate as you go along. So kind of 3 categories of things you can do there. Again, like, it's not one or the other. You're going to be doing all of these things in parallel and probably like tiering it, doing most for the ones that you really care about, your kind of top tier options. I'm going to pause there kind of slightly. I think, those 3 kind of steps are probably like the biggest ones we'll kind of share on the call. I will go through the other bits as well, but that's the figuring out what you want, polishing your CV, networking. That should be enough to kind of really get you going and kind of like into a rhythm where you can then start having chats with people, start building your network and your knowledge around a sector, know what you're looking for, and hopefully start getting kind of not just applications in, but also starting to have meaningful chats with people who might be hiring, if not right now, then in a couple of months' time. And that's the other thing I kind of talk to people about, an average like group PM or director will probably have between 4 and 6 people reporting into them. Average tenure for tech roles is 2 years, something like that. So average hiring process probably takes 3 months to run. You do the sums, like most people who have people reporting into them and might be hiring managers will be hiring about 50% of their time. So reaching out to people proactively, even when they're not hiring, is effective. Okay, researching the role. So as you're doing your outreach for people, like, and particularly like either before you speak to them, but particularly if you get that kind of first round call, you want to be doing a little bit of research on who you're speaking to. Again, time kind of cap this based on how high priority this opportunity is. But basically, the first thing you should be doing is looking at the job description and mapping it to your experience, so that they're going to say, "Hey, we're looking for someone who does X, Y, Z, blah 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 blah." Great. Think about what are the questions they're going to ask that map to those job description points, and then think about like what are the answers that you can give from your experience that answer that question. And again, like these days, using an LLM to help you go through this, like job description, what are the key things they're looking for? What are the questions they might ask to test this? Drop in your CV. What are the great stories I could talk about? It's not going to give you all the answers, right? But it's going to give you some pointers. And like when you go back and forth with it, you're going to have, it's going to kind of help prime you. The other thing you can do then is just do a deeper dive on the company. And a lot of companies will really value this, right? They'll want someone who's competent, but more than anything else, they'll want someone who's passionate about their product and their company. Why do they want that? People who are passionate about your company and your product are much more committed, they work harder, they perform higher. There's a much lower chance that they're going to, bounce out the role after 2 months because they actually joined and it wasn't right for them. So you want to be able to communicate that passion, like either real or if needs be, like fake it, but this is definitely the job for you. This is what you're going for. And a few kind of like pointers here on where you can do research on companies. So if you want to look at their culture, look at Glassdoor, obviously, look at LinkedIn. I mean, and LinkedIn, not just their company page, but what are the people who are in similar roles posting about? Like, are the other PMs posting on LinkedIn? Is the head of product or the CPO posting about stuff? Make sure you look at the product itself. It's just amazing how many PMs turn up to interviews and they clearly have no idea about the product they're interviewing for. So if this is a B2C product, use it. Like there is no substitute, right? Just go and use the product and note down like your opinions on it and your questions and things. If it's a B2B product or an enterprise product, might be a bit more tricky. Do they have a freemium version? Do they have a demo? Can you kind of see some screenshots at least on G2, or can you get a sense of what they do, what they're offering, even if you can't kind of look at the, get into the product itself. But like you have to do this. It's almost like mandatory before taking an interview. Obviously, like user satisfaction, how people find the product. You could find that on review sites like G2 or Trustpilot. You can look in the App Store for the reviews. Positioning, so both, what is their value proposition? How do they position themselves against competitors? How are they growing? Look at things like their website, like what is the language they're using? What do they talk about on social media? Do you see ads they're running? Do they come up in the news? Again, you can kind of Google like a company, but then filter by the news section to see where they've come up in the press. That would generally throw out funding announcements if they're VC backed, which will probably give you a bit more analysis. So G2 is g2.com, fairly sure, is a review website for B2B software. So if you're looking at B2B companies, then that's a place to go. And you can look at, HubSpot versus Salesforce. Down here, what else might you look at? Growth. So are they getting bigger? If you look at SimilarWeb, Ahrefs, these kinds of companies, again, if you don't recognize any of these companies that I've kind of put here, just stick them into Google, they'll pop up. You can put in companies and you can see like how much traffic has hit their website. And that's generally like a pretty good proxy for how fast they're growing, like month on month, year on year. How big are they compared to other players in the sector? So, don't compare an enterprise company to Facebook. I mean, that's like ridiculous. But if you're like, oh, I'm thinking of going into a marketplace, how big is, Etsy versus eBay versus, I don't know, Poshmark? This is going to be like a good comparison. You'll get some like order of magnitude directions from SimilarWeb. And financial health can be quite tricky. Check the news. If they're public, there's all the investor presentations. If they're private, Crunchbase, funding rounds, traction, these sorts of things. Again, I'm not saying like do all of these things for every single company you apply to. I'm saying the deeper you get into the interview process, the more you're going to want to research, and the higher up your kind of list of priorities these companies are, the more research you're going to want to do. So do a little bit of research, like 5 or 10 minutes before you put in an application or before you kind of reach out to someone. If you're going to have a chat with someone, do like 15 or 20 minutes of research, I would suggest. And if you get an interview, like a proper interview, then you might do like an hour or two if it's like high up on your list. But prepare for your interviews. Like the number one piece of advice I hear back from recruiters about why PMs are not getting jobs is they just haven't prepared enough. Okay, so that's kind of like researching the opportunity. Final thing then is kind of your interview techniques. And this is a huge area in itself, right? So there's a limited amount I'm going to go into this on this call. But what I wanted to highlight is basically there are only 5 or 6 different types of questions you're going to get asked in a product management interview. And knowing what those questions are and preparing for those types of questions is going to make a massive difference to how you perform an interview. Unfortunately, like interviews are somewhat like performative. They are a kind of simulation of the thing you will be doing, the job you will be doing, and you can get good at your interview regardless of like how good you are at being a PM. And you need to get good at the interviews to get jobs. So I'm going to quickly run through these. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail, again, because I'm not sure it's like best use of time on this call, but there are, 6 types. So 3 on this page, 3 on the next page, 6 types of questions that we see coming up very, very regularly for PM interviews. First, like, career narrative. So it's like, oh, tell me about your, it's the kind of obvious opener. Tell me about your CV, or how did you get to be in this room, or like, why did you apply to this role? Questions about your CV, your experience, why you're applying for this role. And here again, just practice that little pitch on Friends to get it really tight, because particularly if you've been made redundant, it's very easy to get into a negative mindset about it, which then doesn't reflect well when you're pitching for new stuff. So get it tight, make it sound like you're amazing. And you can use this little framework if it helps. So like ARC, what's your kind of overall career trajectory? Where have you come from? Where are you going? Links back to that, very first thing we talked about, your pitch. So like, what are the unique superpowers that you have that no one else is going to bring to this, because you want to lean into them and be like, look, I'm going to be amazing for this because this is what I bring. And the match. So like, why are you a great fit for this particular role? Why is this the perfect one? Because again, you've got to have that fit. Product sense. So these are very popular questions. They are essentially, these are questions about like, what would you build and why? Hey, we're thinking of rebuilding onboarding. What do you think we should do? We're going to launch a new product on doing this. How do we do that? These can be very, very vaguely defined. And so a lot of them is about like showing you're structured in the way that you think, showing that you've got that kind of like rational, logical view of things that product managers are expected to have, and that you can kind of cut through ambiguity and come to a sensible conclusion. Again, very quickly, like before you get started, just make sure you've really understood the question and what they're looking for. And then generally you want to kind of think about the audience, what are their needs, prioritize those, think about the solution, prioritize those. Obviously you only know what you know. You might talk a little bit about kind of some of the information you'd want. And then as a basis, like come up with a conclusion. Like, yes, obviously in a real world setting, you're going to inform these with data, with insights, but that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for like, can you kind of move through that process? So that's what you want to do there. For metrics, you get the kind of classic estimating size ones. We talk through each of these techniques in a lot more detail in the course and how to approach them. So your kind of estimating size is a kind of anything from how many phone boxes are there in London to a kind of like, oh, if we launch this product, what would be the addressable market for it? So you're kind of doing those sorts of things. Or it's a kind of, hey, we're building this thing, what would be a good success metric to have for it? And if you're doing that, then I think about, okay, qualitatively, like what's the objective? How would you describe your kind of best action here? Like what actions might users take? So as in like, what can you actually track? I then think about between those two things, like, your objective and your actions. Do you want something that's more leading or more lagging? What's going to make sense? Like how responsive is it going to be? Once you've then kind of starting to narrow down on a metric, then you want to define it a little bit. So are you looking at, events you've tracked over a day, over a week, over a month? Like what time frame makes sense? Think about what limitations that metric's going to have. And as a result of that, like, would you pair it with other health metrics? That's, if you cover those bases, then you're going to be in like fairly good position. Again, just doing this super briefly. The other three types of question you'll come up with, like favorite products. What's your favorite product? Tell me about that. Make sure you've got one, right? Firstly, it's kind of embarrassing to be in a product manager interview and someone asks you what your favorite product is and you're like, don't really have a thought. And make sure you kind of, whatever you choose, you can justify that, because you want to come across as like interested in their industry, interested in stuff in general, like passionate about things, and commercial. So you might love a product because it's like a great commercial success, even if the user experience isn't amazing. Behavioral questions, these are often like the meat of interview processes. Tell me about a time when XYZ. And basically you need good stories about these things. So like failure, like when something not worked out, because that shows that you are humble, you can learn, you're resilient. Have you worked with other people? Strategy, impact, execution, like how do you get things done? Go into an LLM, ask it to ask you some competency-based questions as a product manager, think about some answers, test your answers on the LLM, test them with real people, go and do some practice on those things as well. And then prepared case studies, you can get all sorts of things. So it's difficult to give specific advice here, but I'd say like if you're getting asked to do some kind of homework assignment, you're probably down to the last 3 or 4 people, right? So put in a lot of effort, like as much as you can, and check out the examples that we've got on the website. And this is a link. Anyone who's signed up to this event, we'll send out a link to the recording. We'll send out the link to these slides so you can link through. Yeah, so that's what I'd say about that. I'm going to leave just a few minutes for questions, but just to let you know, as I say, we'll send out this deck later. There's a few links right at the end here. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn or Hustle Badger, we post daily kind of all sorts of tips like this. This is the course we're summarizing, or we're kind of like doing the highlights of. So if you want to go deeper in any of these things, then that is the course for you. Say like I've been talking nonstop for an hour and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of what's in that course. We've got a bunch of articles. Some of these articles are actually free, so take a look at them if there's particular areas you want to dive deeper into. And yeah, we'll upload the YouTube soon. And then the events here is just like events that we've got on upcoming events on other things. Okay. I am going to run through any questions now. So if you've got any other questions, please do dump them in the chat and I'll get around to as many as I can. So any advice specific to senior level product interviews like director and above? You'll get asked slightly different questions there. So you might get asked, how do you resolve underperformers? How do you retain, people who are performing really well? You're going to get some of those team management questions, and you might get a bit more kind of brand strategy questions. So have a think about those and kind of like stick those into your competency-based questions of like, how would you do X, Y, Z? Again, if they're looking for someone who's managed people before, think about what are the obvious questions they're going to ask, like, have you hired someone? Tell me about a time you hired someone before. Tell me about a time you had to put someone in a performance interview, performance review. Tell me about a time you got, you stretched a top performer to even greater heights. Like, think about what are your examples and how you make those examples really, really tight. Will this be uploaded to YouTube? Yes, absolutely. What else have we got in here? Some great advice, I think, on building on the spreadsheets I was talking about. Any specific prompts that we suggest to use the advertised job descriptions? Yeah, I think we've kind of covered that. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up there. If people don't have any further questions, I will stay on just for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to ask other things. Otherwise, thank you very much. And as I say, we'll kind of follow up with a quick email, just kind of summarizing or send you the links, sending you the recordings and so on. And thank you for coming along. Gemini, you're asking on the warm outreach. You mentioned you should gently ask new connections intros, but do you think this might be a bit subjective as people are so busy they might appreciate a more direct approach? Yeah, the reason I say I wouldn't go and ask people like, are you hiring? Is that if you just ask people, are you hiring? They're going to say, yes, apply here and send you the job description, or they're going to say no, and that'll be the end of the conversation. So I just don't think it's very useful. Whereas if you say, hey, I'm really interested in how you particularly solved this tiny little thing, or could you send me like one top article I should read if I want to break into sustainability? You're more likely to get some kind of ongoing conversation, which is going to build your connection over time. Okay, the Slack group, 𝘚𝘦𝘳𝘀, I mentioned a Slack group where you can drop CVs. Yeah, that's for paying members. So if you sign up to Hustle Badger, £29 a month, then you'll get access to the Slack group, and that's where you can share your CV and get feedback from people. So Sunak is asking, in the current market, I've experienced HRs trying to lowball offers. Any suggestions on how to deal with them? I mean, I think my advice with all these things is like, firstly, you want to align expectations on salary like, as early as possible in the process. So usually that'll be part of the phone screening call. It's like the very first thing, the first kind of like two-way contact you have with them. They'll ask what your salary expectations are. Make sure that aligns so that you don't go through like 5 rounds of interviews and then find out they're not going to pay you what you want. Once you get to the end, if you think they're kind of lowballing you, then you need to have a sense of what your worth is. Have they changed what they think the role is worth? Have they just kind of like put you at the bottom end of the bracket? I would think through kind of like how do you justify your worth, and that's through the other offers that you've got, the impact you can add to the company, the opportunity cost for them to hire someone else. So if you can say to them, actually, I've got a cross offer and it's at this rate, I'd prefer working for you, but you need to match it. That's one way of doing it. If you can say, look, I've got a really rare skill set and I can add tons of value and that's going to more than pay for my salary. That's another way of doing it. And if you think that actually they don't have any other candidates that they could go to, you're the only candidate that they've got through to that stage, then they're not going to be super excited about kind of interviewing a bunch more people. So you're not going to point that out to them, but that's going to play on their mind as they think about these things. Sanidia question here. Are there any recommendations on key principles one should follow in their narrative in the initial interviews? Someone who's done product adjacent role position. No, look, well, I'd say I'd get very tight on why you want to become a PM. I'd get very tight on how you can do the different aspects of being a PM when you haven't actually done it. So have you worked directly with engineers? Have you driven commercial results? Have you done, discovery on customers? Have you done, can you pull together a structured argument and communicate your point? Like, be very clear how you can do those things so that you can show you've got the skill set even if you haven't done it exactly. And if you haven't done all those things in a work setting, try and do them in a project setting or a side hustle setting to give yourself that experience and get that fit. Cool. Couple more questions. So I'll answer two more questions briefly and then sign off. So, Eleanor, how come I have the feeling that everyone looks for senior PMs, even if the role description is junior or PM only? I mean, every company defines their levels slightly differently. So what a PM or a junior PM at one company might be a senior PM or a lead PM somewhere else. It just really depends on what the expectations are of that company. I think this is why if they don't publish the salary, I would definitely try and figure this out in the screening call. Just say like, hey, have you got a salary bracket in mind for this role? And I often do that, to say to people like, look, the money's not as important as finding the right role, but I want to make sure our expectations in terms of, are aligned in terms of the level and the scope of this role, because those things are often, linked, right? Yeah, that's what I've got to say. And then any advice for making a portfolio? Yeah, again, I think this is a kind of nice to have rather than a must have. Nice ones I've seen done quite easily or quite simply are people who've just thrown up a public Notion page and then they've put, a little description, maybe some pictures and, a link if possible. I mean, like, again, this is something that people are probably not going to spend much time on. So unless you're getting other value out of it, then make it easy for people to dip in and spend 2 or 3 minutes looking at your portfolio and come away thinking, wow, this is an amazing person. So really make it kind of like very readable, very easy to dip into. The only kind of like counter argument to that or slight alternative is, when I was, I've been blogging for quite a long time. So even before I started Hustle Badger, then when I was a PM, like senior PM, I wrote a blog from time to time. And that effectively ended up being like a long form CV for me. But I wasn't doing that. That's something I built up over several months. I was writing like one post a month, something like this. And so over 6 months, a year, it became like big enough to be useful. And people mention that in interview processes. So I think that's useful, but it's not worth like immediately cranking out 6 blog posts. It's worth doing like, if you like blogging, if you've got interesting things to say, make that like part of your ongoing thing that you do, like networking, so that whether you're looking for a job or not, it just kind of accumulates. And then when you do need to find a job, you've got it there and you can rely on it and get some value out of it. Yeah, that's what I'd say on that one. Okay, I am going to wrap up there. Thank you very much for coming along, and we will post the recording shortly. Have a great evening.